A couple weeks ago, I got the chance to play the new Lords of the Fallen, and I gotta say, the game is pretty good. It aims to hit basically all of the classic action RPG, Souls-like elements, from exploration to item description lore to strategic combat, and it does a lot of it really well. When I reached the end of my session, I didn't want to stop playing. And right now, I get to show off some of the game to all of you, and I want to do it in a way where every type of player can benefit. So I'll start with a brief overview of my experience, followed by a more in-depth look at some of the game's mechanics. If you want a spoiler-free look and just want to know whether the game seems like it's worth getting, watch the overview. And if you want a closer look at the mechanics and how they feel to someone familiar with these kinds of games, watch the whole thing. With that, I hope you enjoy the video, and feel free to subscribe to see more. Side note, I don't have any of my own captured footage from the event, just some provided B-roll. So I will do my best to explain, but what happens on screen will not always be exactly relevant. So Lords of the Fallen begins how you may expect, a cinematic full of world building and death. You begin with a tutorial that honestly throws a lot at you, a bit too much I would say, as there are a ton of mechanics to learn in the game. But most of them are pretty intuitive, so once you get playing, it generally flows naturally. I got to play through the first few biomes and bosses, experience most of the core mechanics, and interact with a number of NPCs. That was all in just a few hours, and I am very excited to play the rest of the game. I think most people looking for more content in the genre can expect a pretty good time with Lords. It scratches the Souls action itch in a lot of ways, and figuring out the combat and new systems is a pretty enthralling experience. But the game's not perfect. As I said, the tutorial is a bit overwhelming with the number of mechanics. Plus, some of the first trailer impressions I've seen were people commenting on the weapons seeming to lack weight. I definitely felt that while watching some of the light class gameplay, but during my own playthrough as a bog standard dude with a sword and shield, I was having fun the whole time and I didn't get the feeling of my weapons not being weighty enough. The combat plays into the genre's emphasis on strategy and choosing your swings, always monitoring your stamina for attacking and dodging. The game features a short evade and an almost comically longer roll if you press dodge twice. Shielding is strong since the game features a parry mechanic somewhat like Sekiro, where if you block at the right time, you inflict posture damage to your enemy, eventually leading to a critical hit. The parry ended up being a really commonly used tool for me and worked against a lot of enemies. The enemy designs include basic mobs, but also some interesting variations, especially since there are normal world enemies, those you fight in Axiom, and underworld enemies, those you fight in Umbral. Here we have one of the most distinguishing aspects of the game, the two different worlds. Basically, you have your overworld, Axiom, but there is a second shadow or underworld called Umbral. Umbral is accessible through your lantern, or by dying and getting a second chance there. And the only way out of Umbral is at specific lamp checkpoints. So it either serves as a second chance to not fully die, or it's a zone you have to willingly shift to progress throughout the game. For instance, doors or paths may be blocked in Axiom but open in Umbral, so you have to travel to Umbral, cross, and then try to find a way back to Axiom further along. When I played, I found the pacing between the two zones to work out really well. Throughout the full game, the devs will have to make sure that the swapping doesn't get tedious, but just based on my demo, Umbral provided a tense change of pace from the overworld. I found the back and forth to be a lot of fun. And of course, a game like this finds a lot of its worth in its boss fights. And for the most part, those were a good time too. Some humanoids, some not, but a few times the game got my heart racing. I won't detail too much in this section, but my only chief complaint with the bosses was that I wished most of them were harder and more punishing. And I did get the chance to talk with some of the developers and tell them that, so maybe the final build of the game will be closer to the difficult and rewarding sweet spot. And with that, I'm going to close the overview section here. If you are a Souls fan and you're wondering if you should get this game, I'd say odds are looking like a yes. Of course, I'd also recommend checking out full game reviews when they come out near or on release, but as a player myself, I'm pretty excited to play more. I think the game has some issues, some of which can be easily changed and others less so, but none of them are big enough to get in the way of this being a pretty good time. And some of the deeper mechanics, if done right throughout the whole game, might turn it into something special. So I'll get more into the details now, so choose to stay or leave depending on how much detail you want. A particular area I would like to delve into to start would be the lore and storytelling. Obviously my channel is pretty big on that and I'm pretty invested in that. But because I didn't have too long to spend with the game, I didn't explore the item descriptions or story in general in much depth. Lords of the Fallen goes for the classic item description, story, and lore tidbits, but I can't offer much review on the quality of it here. The game definitely sets itself up to have the opportunity for a rich world of mythology with all their ancient demon lord and light pillars elements in the intro, but the actual execution and how deep things get, I'll have to wait to comment on. Beyond that, I want to start at the beginning. As I mentioned, the tutorial throws a lot at you. There are plenty of controls, unique mechanics, and game functions to get used to and keep track of. The devs said they had been working on paring the amount of info down, but I still found it to be a lot and I didn't internalize everything. Fortunately though, most of the important aspects come pretty naturally, so I didn't have to worry about missing out on too much, just some of the more niche moves. Among the controls and mechanics, the most unique addition is the umbral lamp. This is basically what signifies you as the main character of the game. It is the reason you can go into the umbral world and respawn after death. You can use it in the normal world Axiom to attack enemies or peer into umbral. Sometimes this lets you get past walls or block paths, but other times you need to fully enter umbral and the lamp lets you do that too. Inside umbral, you come across an almost flood-like fungal world with additional enemies. The longer you stay there, the more enemies become aware of you and the more dangerous it gets. But at the same time, fighting through umbral gives you more rewards than staying in Axiom. Not to mention, it lets you physically progress in some cases. The respawn mechanic in this game uses umbral too, and it is kind of like Sekiro in that you get 2 lives. Except here, if you die in Axiom, you get sent to umbral. If you die in umbral, that's it, you get sent back to the checkpoint. So if you choose to go into umbral with the lamp, you lose that second life. Again, it's risk versus reward. And that interplay ended up being a great change of pace for me when I played. It kind of works like a story with 2 plotlines. A good author knows when to switch from one to the other to keep the reader really engaged. In my play session, I felt like the game did a good job of going back and forth, so I hope the rest of the game keeps up that tempo. And as a final point on umbral, the game gives 2 kinds of respawn checkpoints. The first are your normal set locations throughout the game. The second are beacons you place yourself. Around the game world, you can find some small zones that have umbral flowers on the ground. Here you can plant an umbral seed to create your own respawn point. But the seeds are a consumable item, so you will only have a limited amount of them at any time. In my playthrough, I seem to have a decent few, but I could see it becoming a strategic decision on where you want to place them or to prioritize getting a lot of them to place anywhere possible. The devs also mentioned that New Game Plus might have only these self-made respawn points, no set ones, which would be quite an opportunity for dedicated players looking for a more difficult and player-driven experience the second time around. So that's a bit of groundwork. Now let's talk bosses. I got to play against a few. There was a tutorial boss designed to kill you, a couple humanoid bosses with their own shticks, and a final gargantuan curse-rotted Greatwood type to finish out the session. I was fortunately able to play against and beat all of them so I can give a more full review. I'm no god tier gamer, but I did finish first out of the group I was in, and plenty of the other press people there weren't able to make it to the end. So here is where coming to a nerd's YouTube channel might be better than a standard gaming article. The first boss offered a normal, beatable Phase 1, followed by a Phase 2 introduction to a new boss, the Light Reaper I think is the name, who is shown in the intro cinematic and according to the devs will appear multiple times throughout a playthrough. He is just tanked with health, so you will die in the first fight. You don't necessarily have to, but it will take a ton of practice to be able to one-shot him, especially at level 1. Then there were a few humanoids. There was Pieta, someone whose name I forget, and the Master of Hounds. All were pretty fun and hit different notes. Pieta was a 1v1 against a paladin. Sword strikes and holy magic attacks which get beefed up during Phase 2. She summons copies of herself and large area spells. Pretty straightforward, and you get a decent sized flat bridge to fight on, giving it a solid spectacle. It's a fun and thematically weighty fight, pretty solid. Then the boss whose name I forgot, and who I don't think I have any footage from, was a flail wielding sister in a more enclosed room. She included 2 ranged mobs who added pressure to the fight, plus a parasite. Parasites are small umbral creatures that show up occasionally and grant buffs to enemies, sometimes even giving them invincibility. So in the fight, you hunt down the parasite and destroy it with your umbral lamp, then you get rid of the mobs, and then you take out the boss. It's a pretty hectic fight and the boss has a strong kit, so it makes for a bit of a thrill. Then another humanoid with extra mobs is the Master of Hounds, an archer who, as the name suggests, summons a lot of dogs. Unfortunately for me, the Hound AI seemed a bit buggy, so the fight was pretty easy. I didn't have to worry about the hounds too much, and was able to chunk the main boss down quickly. The devs said they were aware of this as an issue, so hopefully it gets updated before the release. The arena is a big wide open circle, so if the hounds do get updated to actually add pressure, it still won't be like Capra Demon in a super enclosed room with 2 dogs. And finally, the last boss appeared just when I was thinking to myself I could really use a non-humanoid boss right now. As I thought that, I was greeted with the Corrugulator or some other word like that of flesh, also known as the Bog Lord. This is a massive, rotund enemy overflowing with flesh and mutations. It has wide-reaching and long-stretching arm attacks mixed with poison emission, big charge dash grabs, and AoE slams. Plus, there is an occasional parasite buffing it too. I compared this to the Curse-Rotted Greatwood from Dark Souls 3, and I know a lot of people didn't like that boss, but I meant the comparison as a compliment since I like both. And that linkage is more of an overall feel since Bogflesh here doesn't have the only damageable through weak spots mechanic, so I think if people don't like the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, they still might like this boss. I really enjoyed this fight, and it pushed me to the brink of my health and heartbeat. I could get a breather by moving back to range, but it also had attacks to make up the distance. Unfortunately, it seemed to have an issue with its big charge grab, where it wouldn't grab me even though it looked like I was really in the hitbox. One of the devs mentioned that they will be widening that grab zone, which I am actually happy to hear, since there were a few times I definitely should have been more punished for my failed or bad roll. I should have been grabbed. But because I managed to never get grabbed, I ended up beating this boss on my first try. So while it was a fun challenge, I could definitely enjoy it buffed up a bit, which might happen with the grab and other potential changes. More punishment would make it feel more rewarding to best, even if it already did achieve that feeling for me just a bit as it currently is. So that was my time with the bosses. Now let's discuss some mechanics. The first one I want to mention is a small one, but it relates to that last boss fight. Remember how I said there was a parasite in the fight occasionally buffing the main boss? Well, that being there actually allows for a cool, pretty deep healing mechanic to take place. In Lords, there are to my knowledge 3 ways of healing. First is through your standard rechargeable, upgradable healing item, your Estus. Second is through an overtime, life gem-like consumable. And third is slightly more complex. Through a few ways, you can get gray or withered health. Basically a gray bar on the right side of your health bar that encroaches on the normal red health. You get this withered health from using one of the lamp's attacks, healing while you're in Umbral, and maybe other ways that I currently forget. And the gray health is tentative. If you get hit, you lose that health and only have your remaining red health. But if you hit an enemy first, this gray health gets fully restored as red. Kind of like Bloodborne's rally mechanic, but not as immediate because it keeps sticking around past a few seconds. What's really interesting here, and something I didn't pick up on while playing, a dev told me about it later, is that you can use the withered health as a strat. During the Bogflesh fight, I said there are little parasites. Well, when you soulflay these enemies to destroy them, you should generate withered health, and then you should be able to turn that withered health red by attacking the boss. If you are out of healing items and your health is, say, halfway depleted, you can use the lamp on the parasites and you will take on withered health. But this withered health starts from the right side of the health bar, so it isn't dependent upon your current remaining health. It doesn't start wherever your red is, it starts at the end of the bar. And if you have half health, it fills the empty gap. If you wither the half of your bar that is gone, and then you hit the boss, you will effectively gain health. You generate completely new healing. I didn't get to consciously try this, but I might have done it by accident while fighting, since I did run out of all my healing items during the fight. And now I want to get into the game again and try this out, because it adds another deeper level of strategizing and healing, allowing you to keep going even after your traditional healing runs out if you can choose your attacks wisely enough. This is just the kind of mechanic that I want to see that really feels like it's trying to iterate and improve upon the formula. Another enjoyable yet simpler mechanic was the parry. As I said, parrying works kind of like Sekiro, where if you block right before an attack, you inflict what is essentially posture damage. Enough of this and you can get a critical hit on an enemy. I felt like the window was pretty generous, so it made parrying a really strong tool fighting against most enemies. especially because I had a shield, so blocking was quick and easy. I don't know if they will tighten the window for release, but honestly I wouldn't be opposed to something like that if they wanted to. Either way, it offered a nice opportunity to have a smart strategic play other than rolling or panic blocking. Increasing your options in this case is almost always a good thing to me. And then an area of the game that I didn't explore too much was the utilization of throwables and magic, which I believe are both tied to a rechargeable ammo bar that sits below the stamina bar on the HUD. Instead of having throwables or ranged combat depend on consumables, the game gives you an ammo bar that recharges when you rest. There are upgrades and consumables that can better and augment this, but the basic design is one where you don't have to worry about permanently running out of supplies. I believe magic works on the same bar, with your spells taking up certain amounts of the resource. There are 3 kinds of magic in the game, basically like schools or elemental types, each with a different focus. Rogar or Fire is big on AoE, Radiant or Holy is focused on co-op and status effects, and Umbral or Pure Magic deals high health draining damage. But I didn't use one single cast of magic during my play, so I can't comment too much beyond that, and I could have even gotten something there wrong. But I did mention co-op, so speaking on that, I didn't play any, but the devs did say that there is a seamless co-op experience where you can play with another player in one of your worlds, basically staying together for the entire time throughout the game. I believe they said each person gets their own loot, so both can upgrade and make builds while co-oping. There does seem to be a lot to find, loot, and upgrade, from normal RPG stats to your weapons and healing items to even the Umbral lamp. You can give it different abilities and more charges to suck the souls out of multiple enemies. That could mean good rewards for exploring, which would be ideal since exploration and tracking the branching paths of the game world seemed to be a big focus in what I played. Lots of doorways to open and areas where you circle back into through a new path. The different biomes I was able to see highlighted a good amount of level design variety, both in visuals and how you play through them. They all had Umbral versions which were necessary to enter into to fully traverse, but they had their own style too. There was a forested mountain region and a village which played differently than the more vertical cliffside settlement and caves. Within each area itself, some of the visual design did seem to blend together, just color-wise, but I didn't focus enough to determine how big of an issue that was. I was definitely more keyed in on exploring for items and slicing my way to the next objective or boss. If I get to play more before release or for a review, I'll spend more time considering that. And while that covers a lot of my experience and the fun I had, there are more issues that I partially have touched on but should detail more clearly. I've seen a good amount of discussion mentioning how the weapons look or sound pretty light, like they lack weight. I didn't experience this too much while playing with my sword and shield, but watching the footage of some of the lighter weapons like the daggers, I see where people are coming from. I thought that some of the other parts of the game had really good sound design, so I would hope this gets addressed before the game's release. I'm assuming devs are looking at comments online, and I saw a lot of comments about this, so I would think it's at least getting discussed to be potentially addressed. And I already mentioned the tutorial throwing a lot of information right at the start, but I also felt that way when I first got to the hub area. Now, maybe they just wanted to show everyone off since it was a press event, but there felt like way too many NPCs at the hub when I got there. There were so many people to meet for the first time all at once that I didn't really internalize a lot of them. And I got to see at least one example of finding an NPC in the world and sending them back to the hub, and that made them a lot more memorable and distinct when compared to the dozen or so that were already hanging out there. Overall, I think this game is checking a lot of the boxes that people expect in the genre, but I'm hoping it's able to also capitalize on what makes it its own experience. I think the potential is there. It does already stand out to me thanks to some of the deeper mechanics, like the advanced healing and the two-world split being fun in what I've played, but the full game will need to make those things last and stand out throughout the whole experience. I'm really excited by what I've gotten to see and play so far. There's a bit of jank and some minor to moderate issues, but I can look past most of that thanks to the large number of positives and because it at least sounds like the devs are making updates in the right direction. As we and I get more info over the next few weeks and months, I'll let you know if that opinion changes or solidifies. The next few months really seem to be packed to the brim with good gaming news, especially for FromSoft fans, and I'm hyped to explore it all on my channel, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me, and thank you for watching this video. Peace.